elections are indispensable to democracy. You can't have democracy without them, but neither can you have democracy without an even greater commitment to the values, institutions, and customs that make it work. And I believe that Georgia is in the process of creating these commitments to values, institutions, and customs that make it work. As I said, the democracy in Georgia started 20 years ago when the Soviet Union collapsed. So far, observer missions from OEC, IRI, and NDI seem to report the elections are on track. We should expect their reports. We should definitely hold the current Georgian government feet to the fire, expecting reasonable conduct of elections by European standards. However, we should not face an either-or choice of focusing exclusively on elections or pursuing American interests. That's a false choice. Mr. Chairman, hopefully the U.S. can learn from our recent mistakes. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so very much. Dr. Tsereteli, if you would proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's an honor to be a witness on this commission. I would like to submit my written statement that I already submitted actually, for the records. Thank you. I think timing of this hearing couldn't be more appropriate. The streets of Tbilisi, as well as social media, is filled with demands and facts reflecting on the developments related to prison abuse. Citizens of Georgia ask questions how something like that could be happening in the country that has European and Euro-Atlantic aspirations, that is known for its tolerance and cordial human relationships. Unfortunately, the videos only prove what was said many times by some people and also was reflected by the US Department of State annual reports on human rights. I don't think that we fully appreciate here in this room magnitude of events unfolding in Georgia at this point. Georgia's prison system, as well as its pre-trial detention mechanism, is a potent factor in Georgian political, economic, and social life, which impacts the daily lives of thousands of Georgians and their decisions about how they deal with the government, as well as on how they approach elections. There is a fear of state in Georgia. Some government officials assessed prison abuse as a systemic problem, and they are correct. But this is a moral failure as well. Georgian society is shocked by the facts of abuse of power and maybe cover-up that involved high-level officials and demands full-scale investigation. This abuse can only happen in an environment of unchecked and unbalanced power, such exists in Georgia today. This case increases importance of upcoming elections. I think it's good news that despite responding to this crisis and street events, both government as well as opposition called on calm, and opposition in particular called against unplanned street events. Georgia made visible progress in creating functioning state entities in recent years, reducing regulatory burden, developing critical infrastructure, and eliminating bribery in bureaucracy. These are distinct achievements, and the Georgian people as well as government deserve credit for those achievements. But those achievements also raise the bar for expectations for Georgia. Georgia is facing difficult security challenges, but it can only meet those challenges if it has national consensus on major issues affecting the country. The Georgian population has expressed multiple times in referendums and polls its desire to join transatlantic and European security and economic institutions. Achieving those strategic objectives require internal stability. But stability can only be achieved if political process creates an environment of broader political representation in the government. Leaders all around the world, heads of states, international institutions, US politicians, leadership of NATO, friends of Georgia, see the upcoming election on October 1st as an important milestone in building Georgia's democratic statehood. Many have called on Georgia to make certain that voters have an opportunity to express their free choice, and once they did it, to make sure that results of elections are respected by all the participants of political process. In recent years, the Georgian political scene has been completely dominated by United National Movement of Georgia, or UNM, the party of President Saakashvili. The UNM has won constitutional majority in the parliamentary elections of May 2008, which has de facto created one-party rule in Georgia. In fact, Georgia has been ruled by UNM, who is in no significant opposition since 2004. Moreover, developments after 2008 elections effectively eliminated debate and political collaboration from the Georgian scene. This had led to many harmful internal and external decisions by the Georgian leadership, which has responded to criticism by frequently suppressing opposition with excessive force. One-party system do not represent electoral mood in Georgia. I will focus very briefly on some of the things that, in my opinion, the United States government should do in order to support free election process in Georgia, and then hopefully we'll have some questions and answers. I think the U.S. should stay actively engaged in Georgia as an important observer and facilitator of the development. Success of Georgia is essential for U.S. strategic interests in the broader Middle East and Central Asia region, but it's also essential for stability, broader stability. I think U.S. needs to entertain frank public discussion about the state of democracy in Georgia. Georgia has made some progress, and the current government has done good things for the country. But narrative that stresses Georgia's liberal credentials need to be recast in light of some significant democratic shortfalls. Monitor closely unfolding details of the current prison crisis and investigation. I think the U.S. needs to establish strict conditions and benchmarks for the Georgian government to ensure the elections are held in free environment. Election monitors from the U.S. government would be very useful. U.S. needs to collaborate very closely with the Intergovernmental Commission on Election Process Violations. I think this commission is doing a positive job, positively contributing to the process. The U.S. should communicate to the Georgian leadership that if there are doubts about legitimacy of the elections, the U.S. will not recognize its results. Plan to hold another congressional hearing after the elections to review progress and announce this in advance to the elections. The U.S. needs to monitor developments after the election as well. The election process may not end by the night of October 1st. It is possible that the results of the election in several districts will be disputed and recounts may be requested. In order to avoid confrontation, it is important that there is a process of mediation through OSCE or other monitoring groups where U.S. will be participant. I think United States needs to mount effort to review the state of Georgia's media, ensuring access to alternative sources of information throughout the country. Insist on immediate release of satellite dishes confiscated by the government. Advising adding international representatives to the Georgian National Communication Commission, and then closely monitoring its operation will be positive steps. Georgia has potential to become a democratic state, full-fledged member of the transatlantic family of nations. That potential needs to be accelerated and deepened. The upcoming elections need to be seen from that perspective. Proper conduct of elections will get Georgia closer to that goal. Mismanagement of the elections may throw Georgia back for several years or maybe even decades. In the 40s, after traveling to Georgia, John Steinbeck wrote, "It is a magical place, Georgia, and it becomes dreamlike the moment you have left it. And the people are magic people. It is true that they have one of the richest and most beautiful countries in the world, and they live up to it. The Georgian people are capable of deciding the right path for their future. Free and fair elections will give them that opportunity." Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. We'll now go to our last, Dr. Gegeshidze.
Mr. Chairman, other members, professional staff, thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity to share with you some of my observations on the situation around elections in Georgia. Excuse my academic style of presenting, since I'm come from the academia and this is my very first time testifying before you. Well, I will start with a very short overview of the path of democratic transformation which Georgia has gone through. Then I'll try to characterize also shortly the state of affairs in and around the elections, what the pre-electoral environment looks like. And then I also try to share with you some of my observations, but very general, not as specific as Dr. Tsereteli presented, some of my observations on what the West in general and United States in particular should do in order to facilitate free and fair election process in Georgia. The first point is that Georgia's record of democratic transformation is controversial. On the one hand, the country is freer than the immediate neighborhood and demonstrates at times spectacular success at institutional modernization. The government was able to liberalize the economy, attract increased foreign direct investment, improve revenue collection, curb elements of small-scale corruption in the public services, streamline inefficient administration, legalize the shadow economy, reduce crime, provide uninterrupted energy supply, and rebuild roads and other infrastructure. Among the most important and spectacular successes of the new government has been the overthrow of the autocratic leader of Ajara, previously defying the central government. On the other hand, the overall quality of democracy promotion raises concerns. Georgia's political development since the Rose Revolution can be measured in various ways, but the Freedom House scores indicate an obvious stagnation. What actually happened was that all power went to the executive body, and the legislative and judicial branches became their perfunctory appendages. Power and the political regime thus became associated with the president. Currently, political institutions that provide pluralism and competition are manipulated by the ruling elite for one reason: to maintain and expand political power. Critics of the government point at serious setbacks in terms of institutionalizing checks and balances, eventually leading to serious misconduct. Further, the existing constitution substantially weakens a legislative body, thus disabling it in its exercise of oversight functions. Also, as the executive dominates the political landscape, it increasingly coerces the judiciary, curbing its independence. Additionally, the state intervenes in the independence of the media and brutally abuses property rights. Georgian democracy has always been hostage to either security concerns or power struggle, and this continues over already 20 years. This is the reason why the Georgian reforms in the sphere of democratic transformation were either one-sided or inconclusive. While the emphasis during the reforms was put on strengthening the state, little attention was paid to building and strengthening democratic institutions and improving human rights. Independent judiciary, rule of law, and media freedom are the most renowned cases of absence of will on the part of the government to reform. One of the recent examples of the inconclusive nature of reforms is Georgia's penitentiary system, which accommodates one of the highest per capita numbers of prisoners in the world. Apparently, the government preferred coercion and intimidation as a method of managing the overcrowded prisons over modern and civilized standards. The terrible videos we have seen last days prove widespread and systematic torture at the prisons. From moral standpoint, it is a big shame for Georgia. From the political standpoint, both domestic and international, it may have far-reaching consequences for the government as well as the country and its image. None of the elections held since independence had been simultaneously free, fair, and competitive. The cleanest of all is considered the October 1990 elections, still Soviet Union, conducted with little violence during the campaign and no evidence of overt interference with the polls, and which brought to power the nationalist and anti-communist political forces. Against this backdrop, the most disputed election since independence has been the presidential election in January 2008. Critics hold that Saakashvili had illegally used budgetary and administrative resources to secure victory with a narrow margin over the opposition candidate. Similar allegations were made about the unfairness of the general elections the same year. Although the international observer missions gave legitimacy to the outcome of both events, subsequent official reports admitted massive irregularities at all stages of the election process. This time around, the picture is mixed. On one hand, the pre-electoral environment is competitive and pluralist. Also, there are some welcome novelties, such as the new election code, intergovernmental commission that operates under the National Security Council, voters list verification commission, must carry rules that obligate cable operators to carry TV channels with news programs during the campaign period, improved format of public debates on the national public TV, etc. On the other hand, some of these novelties are far from perfect. For example, must carry rules have not been timely or properly enforced across the country. Not all recommendations by the Venice Commission have been incorporated in the election code. Also, the prisoners who have committed minor crimes were given electoral rights. However, in the light of the recent scandal over human rights abuse in the penitentiary system, serious doubts arise as to whether the inmates will be able to make free choice at the ballot boxes. Inversely, overwhelming majority of Georgians living outside the country who are perceived to be critical towards the government are practically deprived of the right and or possibility to vote. While competitive and pluralist, the pre-electoral environment is too polarized. Reports, for example, of Transparency International, inform us about numerous cases of intimidation of opposition activities, physical reprisals against opposition supporters, detention and arrest on political grounds, selective use of legal resources against the opposition by imposing disproportional sanctions, pressure on businesses that support opposition, use of public resources for political and electoral process. Apparently, the dominant feature of the post-Rose Revolution period, wherein the ruling party faced a fragmented opposition, has made it relax and has taken it by surprise by Georgian Dream, the newly emerged opposition coalition. As the ruling party dominates at all levels of state governance, it is difficult to differentiate the governing political team's activity from the electoral activity of the ruling party. Given the circumstances, the opposition coalition faces a state rather than the party as a competitor in the elections. The state portrays the Georgian Dream as an enemy of state by accusing of being Russia's fifth column and a retrograde force aiming at sending Georgia back to dark and corrupt past. For most of the public, groundlessness of these accusations is obvious. Nobody believes. Meantime, witnessing all these twists and turns, the public remains deeply distrustful towards the electoral process, and this is the main disadvantage and deficiency of the electoral process. As Georgia remains a primary target of Western assistance, some argue that future assistance programs should be more carefully structured. It is believed that with Georgia being the success story of Western democracy support, too big a share of the assistance package has gone to the government without requiring accountability on spending. Also, the strong political and financial support for Georgia's democratic development after the Rose Revolution has backfired to some extent, since it has not been backed up by clear benchmarks for reform. One such benchmark definitely is these elections. Fair assessment of the whole electoral process has a crucial importance for Georgia, for Georgia's future development. Sadly, though, in the past, there have been instances of premature assessment by international observers that have paid a lip service to Georgian democracy as well as to the West's reputation in Georgia and the wider region. One of the most notorious cases has been a statement by a coordinator of the short-term observation mission, which said that the 2008 presidential elections in Georgia was a triumphant step of democracy. Given the extremely polarized environment, we need to avoid such statements and assessments. More so, the international arbiters, monitors, need to change the criterion of evaluation, and instead of basing their judgment on the comparison with the past electoral process, they have to assess how far or how close these elections are from those in Western democracies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. We do have a vote, so we do have to make our way to the floor in a couple of minutes. But that said, I'll just ask a couple of questions, yield to Mr. Cohen, who will ask a couple of questions. And I think your point about having a follow-up hearing is a good one. We will do that. and it will be done in a very timely manner, so thank you for that, Dr. Tsereteli. Let me just ask a couple of questions. You know, the wealth issue, which has arisen many times, and Dr. Cohen, you mentioned it, $6.4 billion you talked about. You know, even in this country, there's been a ongoing fractious debate about how much an individual should spend, how much can be spent on a campaign. Part of it was settled in a Supreme Court case known as Buckley versus Vallejo, and is pretty much unlimited by the individual candidate towards his or her campaign. In my own state, Senator Corzine spent over $60 million for a U.S. Senate seat. I mean, astronomical amount of money, but, you know, our laws allow that to happen. And I'm wondering if, you know, there's such a check and a balance on all that, and, you know, both sides have valid points. Maybe you want to speak to the issue of having huge amounts of money and being able to essentially buy a campaign, but I know there are limits, so maybe you want to speak to that. Where will Ivanishvili take Georgia? I mean, you, Dr. Cohen, you seem to speak most about that and cite a number of concerns, and I would appreciate if you'd elaborate on that very quickly. And then what our overriding concern has to be is free and fair. Do you think this will be a free and fair election, or are the checks and balances already baked into what will be an election in 11 days, or do you think we have reason to be deeply concerned? I wish I had more time. And Mr. Cohen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I suspect that the biggest issue, which I would like a response to, is where you think the Georgian dream would be if they're successful, where they would take the Georgian government different than where it's been, and what the relationship would be with Russia in terms of how that might affect relations with the West. And also the gentleman mentioned human rights and how you see human rights as being permitted by the present government, and what differences might exist if the Georgian dream were successful in their election, and what do you foresee for the election? Has it been on the conditions to date, as far as advertising, as far as enforcement of laws and restrictions that may have been imposed? Has it been fair?
Gentlemen, excellent questions. All demonstrate your deep interest and expertise. Real quick, on the issue of personal wealth, let us make a comparison. 6 point whatever billion dollars is more, if my calculations are correct, more than a half of Georgia's GDP per annum. So it would not be comparison with Mitt Romney's meager 250 million, and meager in comparison to Bidzina Ivanishvili. It won't be a Ross Perot. It would be a guy or a gal with a pocket $7 trillion deep. People like this don't exist on planet Earth. And there is a culture of bypassing official channels of financing in case of Russian oligarchs, which Mr. Ivanishvili, whether he holds Russian citizenship or not, comes from a political culture of Russian oligarchs. There's a modus operandi of cash. And, you know, if the Georgian government is successfully tracking that, good luck. If they don't, then they can't. But I bet you dollars to donuts, you cannot think about this campaign only with the official figures, probably on both sides, but especially when you have one big, deep pocket. In terms of direction, I think this is a strategic question, and this is something I'm grappling with, and not a lot is said about that, and that is that whether we like Saakashvili or not, he never studied in Russia. He studied in Ukraine and in Colombia. He spent his formative years in Georgia and in the United States, and he built his movement more or less in his image in terms of getting a lot of Western-trained people around him. Georgia Dream, on the other hand, has a Russian oligarch a former Russian oligarch, as its head, has some first-rate diplomats, Ambassador Japaridze, Ambassador Irakli Alazania, which I don't doubt their professional qualities. But that movement also has components that are deeply nationalistic, traditionalist, embedded with the church, and the Georgian church parts of it are embedded with the Russian Orthodox Church, and in some cases xenophobic and anti-Semitic. So I do have concerns about that as well. And the rhetoric about distancing or slowing down the process of NATO integration was a signal. The rhetoric by Mr. Ivanishvili about opening Russian markets, getting closer to Russia, are understandable because traditionally for decades and centuries, Georgia did export fruit, wine, mineral water to Russia. But orientation is not the same as the United National Movement, which is staunchly pro-European. They are aspiring to bring Georgia into the EU. You and I can wonder why would you want to join the EU at this point, but that's their choice. Human rights, clearly there is a place for improvement, as we witnessed in the prison scandal. I'm not a computer geek. I'm not a computer expert. I cannot tell you what is the significance of these recent accusations that they were planting malware on the computers. I think somebody needs to look into that. But in terms of human rights, there's always in every society a place for improvement of individual rights, of privacy, of penitentiary system. No question in my mind that things can be done better in Georgia.
To be totally fair to our other two distinguished witnesses, Mr. Cohen and I are going to have to leave in about 2 minutes. There's only 5 minutes left on the vote. But we will leave this open. Michael Oakes will stand by, and then all of your comments will go into the record, and then we'll, without objection, we'll do it that way because I want to hear from both of you. We both want to hear from both of you. So please proceed as long as you'd like.
First of all, accusations of Georgian church being impeded somehow to Russian church is absolutely wrong and false, and I just don't want to go into this discussion. There are individuals who may be, like individuals from the Georgian government, maybe, like individuals from opposition, maybe, but saying it to the entire church, which is most probably one of the bases of stability in Georgia for the last decades, I think it's very wrong. About the wealth of Mr. Ivanishvili and money in politics. And during the elections in 2010, in local elections, mayoral elections, Mr. Alazania spent about 100 times less than incumbent mayor of Tbilisi, Mr. Ugulava. 100 times. There was a difference, was 100 times. So talking about money coming into politics sounds like not very relevant. Although I personally do not support large money coming into politics. So there is a limits of how much each party could spend. And I think government is very efficiently pursuing these limits to restrict money spending into Georgian politics. On to issue of future of Georgia. As my colleague and friend Ariel mentioned, Mr. Ivanishvili, from the time he announced his participation in politics, said that he's basing his political group as a core group on Mr. Alazania's Free Democrats and the Republican Party, who is also known for his pro-Western credentials. So I think by that he expressed his pro-Western orientation from the beginning. And we may again have some people in his coalition, like in the government, who are willing to maybe change a little bit the course of Georgia's development, but I don't see major challenges in terms of pro-Western orientation to Georgia. Thank you.
Without objection, at the conclusion of Mr. Gegeshidze's statement, the hearing will be adjourned. But again, this will all be on the record. And I thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right. Well, regarding billions in the election campaign, yes, I'm also would not support big money, participating in the being